Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. In this video, I'm going to talk about different types of phishing resistant authentication methods that we have in Microsoft Entra ID, right? So now there would be different questions. Uh, what are those? What are the different phishing resistant authentication methods that we can implement and how we can implement, right? And it totally would be depend on the different types of environment one or respective organization have, right? So there are different scenarios where uh, which organization or respective organization have their environment, be it pure cloud or cloud-based environment or hybrid environment, or maybe they have the environment which is going to be majorly if the organization is using both cloud and on-premises, that means they would either be have hybrid setup or they might have kept both separately and they are managing parallelly both environments together, and they have different use cases, different requirements, and that is why they are putting or keeping both environments separately, right? So those are the environments wherein organizations can deploy or implement phishing resistant MFA methods, or we can say the authentication methods in shorts, right? So what are those? So there are four methods, which includes or starting with Windows Hello for Business, right? So that's the first method we can say. The second is FIDO2, which is passwordless or passkey, we can say. Passkey, FIDO2, security keys. Then third is certificate-based authentication, which is CBA, right? And the fourth is Microsoft Authenticator app, which also comes with number matching and context awareness of the user location and authentication process, right? So these are the four phishing resistant MFA methods. And since these are already available and you might have seen, and those are the methods which are available since long back, and a few of those are recently introduced by Microsoft. So those are being built with a strong authentication mechanism in backend, as well as it has the capabilities to identify how people are trying to authenticate themselves and how people can use those appropriately, right? So, so let's say talk about the first one, which is Windows Hello for Business. So what is it? So Windows Hello for Business is going to be kind of a authentication method, which is a strong enough method and which is going to help us reducing and replacing the passwords with biometric authentication. It includes fingerprint as well as facial recognitions and the PIN, right? So these are the three forms Windows Hello for Business is going to allow us to use when we set it up, be it in cloud-only environment or hybrid environment, right? So this way we can go ahead and deploy it, and those can be used. So now, why it's phishing resistant, if you ask that, right? So it has a credentials which stores the private keys stored on the devices TPM system, which is a trusted platform man module, and it cannot be extracted once it is set up, right? Once it is created there, then authentication is happening on device bound and cannot be fished or replayed that session again, because whatever the authentication mechanism is going to happen, that is going to be happen on TPM, which is a trusted platform module. And from there, it is going to validate that identity or that requests, right? Then it also uses the asymmetric cryptography between public and private key pair value. We can say it, let's say device has a private key, right? So system is going to simply check if device has a private key that is set up with this particular Windows Hello for Business verification or authentication, then it is going to validate and let it access, as well as let it verify it, right? So this way it is going to set it up. Now let's look at how it works with a simple use case and example, right? When user enrolls to the Windows Hello for Business, on the both context, where it is pure cloud environment, including Entra ID registered or joint devices not registered, and hybrid AD join, right? And when in that case, the user registers the biometric or PIN, the device gets registered, and then it is going to store all of that details on the DPM, right? And then user log into the Windows or any Entra integrated applications when the scanning of the fingerprint or PIN or face recognitions, then it validates the private key which is stored on the TPM, right, to use and authenticate against that request with the Entra ID, right? And it is not going to expose any of those credentials, right? Because that connection is going to happen between TPM and the Entra ID server authentication. And then it is going to validate and make sure both are validated together so that there is no exposing of credentials or any identity or anything, right? So this way it is going to authenticate and validate. Now let's look at a simple example. When there is a user who signs on specific application, which is maybe called it could be Teams on Windows 10 or 11 device, and which recognizes the user's face recognition or fingerprint instead of using the passwords, and it allows users to log in, right? And then it just once it is validated, it is going to simply let people or user get into the system and they can access it. So that's the pretty straightforward. So there is no credentials, there is no password, there is nothing, right? So that's the straightforward uh, accessibility for users, right? So let's look at the second, which is passkey, FIDO2 security keys, right? So what is passkey? Passkey is fast identity online, right? Security key, right? Definitely it has hardware keys as well as it can be used with the software tokens or software keys as well, right? So majorly, you might have seen that passkeys or hardware keys, which includes USB stick devices, NFCs, or kind of Bluetooth devices, which can be used to authenticate users with public key cryptography without transmitting sensitive credentials or without transmitting any credentials, right? And this is going to be used between that one. Now, why it is phishing resistant? So it is phishing resistant because it does not share any secrets or anything and are stored online, right? It prevents credentials theft because those credentials are put in a place where those are not easily identifiable as well as recoverable, and those cannot be theft as well, right? Whatever the user authenticates, those authenticates on the possession of specific keys or PIN or biometric verifications. For example, I have an USB stick with me. I would be simply able to connect to the device and authenticate myself and then get into the device. Even I can use my biometrics as well as PIN, which I know, and that PIN can be used to get into the system by entering that code, and I would be able to log into the system and access the resources. And also it cannot be tricked by fake login pages where requires the domain validations, right? So that is also not possible with this. So that is why it is going to be phishing resistant, right? So let's look at how it works with the example and use case. When user registers the FIDO key or passkey with the different tools or systems with Microsoft Entra ID, the security key is generated and that unique cryptographic key pairs value authentication is created, right? And that created keys are stored in that respective hardware token, or it could be stored in specific to either if we have set PIN or biometrics, those also are being stored there, right? And when signing in, the user plugs in the keys, be it USB or NFCs or be it Bluetooth as well. So it is going to ask user to validate with PIN or biometrics, right? And then it is going to validate with Entra. right? So Entra ID is going to request using the public key stored in the system, and it is going to allow us to log into the system. Now, let's look at the example when there's a user who tries to access or plugins that specific USB stick or USB device, and then tries to authenticate any of the applications or tries to log in to any application. It is going to simply validate with that key, which is stored on that particular USB stick, and it is going to validate, and it is going to let people or user access that respective application or resource. So this way it is going to simply validate. So there is also no password, that there is no credentials, there is nothing. So user doesn't have to enter anything of that sort, and it is going to simply allow them to log in, right? So this is a phishing resistant authentication method, which is FIDO2, or we can say the passkey FIDO2 security keys. Let's look at the third one, which is certificate-based authentication. So what is certificate-based authentication, right? So CBA, certificate-based authentication, which uses X59 or 509 certificates for authentication, and which is commonly used in smart cards or PKI, which is public infrastructure environments majorly. And why it is phishing resistant, right? It relies on public-private key pairs, which is going to prevent credentials thefts, right? Also, it requires the possession of smart card or device certificate, so that making it difficult to compromise for those unwanted actors, right? Right. And also users who are going to authenticate, they don't need any passwords. So without any credentials, without any passwords, it is going to allow them to access the resources and use those for all of that activities, right? And how it works. So when user is issued certificate and which is tied to their identity on respective devices, and when user tries to sign into any of the cloud or any of the applications, the system requests the users to present their certificate from their respective smart card or local certificate store. And once it is present or showed and validated, and the private key is stored on the smart card or that respective device, that is going to be used for authentication, right? And once it is authenticated, Entra ID is going to verify the signatures using its public key, and then it is going to grant the access to that respective resource. So this way, it is going to simply validate everything in the backend in fraction of seconds, and it is going to allow the access to those respective applications, right? Let's look at the example for this one. When any user or any employee in short can or try to use any of the applications or system, and they use smart card or certificate to securely sign into the Entra protected system instead of using password. It is going to simply validate everything with the public key in the backend, but the user doesn't know all of that process is happening, right? And whatever the actions are happening in the backend, user doesn't have to do anything. Instead, user can simply, once uh, that certificate is going to be starting validation, that's going to simply process that action, and it is going to simply let user access the system. So that's going to happen in a fraction of seconds. It is not taking minutes or hours. It is going to happen in very few minutes, very few seconds, not minutes. Yep. So yeah, this is the certificates based authentication. And the last one is Microsoft Authenticator app, right? Which is a number matching and context awareness. So what is Microsoft Authenticator, right? So we all know that Authenticator app is being used for so many different scenarios, and since long back we are using it, right? But this is also considered, and this is also part of one of the passwordless as well as phishing resistant authentication method, right? MFA security with a number matching as well as additional context that it is going to provide us when in or when using the phishing resistant authentication methods for MFA fatigue attacks, right? So this way, it is going to reduce number of those attacks, as well as it is going to let people authenticate themselves on a real-time basis. Right now, why it is phishing resistant? When anyone or any user tries to authenticate themselves on respective applications, it is going to show a notification on the screen saying that user has to authenticate and match that number on the screen, and then they have to put that number and verify and validate themselves. And it also prevents the push notification spamming attacks, so that it is not going to spam users and try to get that notification authenticated. Because if user has power to approve, not approve, but enter the code, because user doesn't know the code, that means user won't be able to put any code, and that request is simply going to be denied. So that is going to be prevented. Then how it is going to be context on awareness basis, it is going to keep an IP address as well as location and application name from where this request is coming from, to validate with the Entra ID, as Entra ID is being a centralized system to manage authentication and everything together, right? And it is also going to be tied up with identity. That means whoever is trying to access that particular application, from which location and from which IP. So all of that details is going to be captured and stored for future reference, as well as for validations and to detect the phishing attempts. And the next is passkey, which is one of the feature that will be available, or that's in preview currently, but that is going to enhance the phishing resistance by integrating with authentication, right? With web authentication protocols with this particular scenario, and that's going to help us to detect and prevent phishing attempts. So now let's look at how it works. So when user tries to log into any of the applications on desktop or on specific devices, or be it any device, right? Instead of simply approving or denying button, the login screen displays the unique number, right? And the user must open Authenticator app and then enter the matching specific number and then approve that request, right? Because instead of putting or pressing that approve button, that's not going to be the right way. Is because that's something when that is not a real phishing resistant method. Instead of using that one, we should use this method where user has to match the numbers and enter the code, and then they have to go ahead and use that one, right? And then when attacker, if in case this notifications or someone tries to access specific locations, and in that case maybe attacker or bad actors, someone, right? When they try to send some fake push notifications, then user will recognize as it is fraudulent because of missing numbers match, and it is not going to be approved, as well as it is not going to accepted at all, right? So in simple example, when there is a user who is trying to access any specific application and then trying to authenticate, and they will get a prompt saying that you need to enter this specific number. And once the user is opening Authenticator app and enter that specific number, then they have to grant it, right? So once the number is matching and granted, that means if that request is approved upon entering the number, then it is going to simply be granted, and user would be able to, or the access is granted on the same, right? So yeah, these are the four different methods. Those are phishing resistant, and these are really be helpful for different scenarios and different requirements to deploy and implement across the organization. And there are ways to deploy it and take the right approach, right, depending on organization requirements, again basis on their needs, what they wanted to deploy, what they are looking for, be it a pure cloud environment or hybrid environment, or they are managing both separately, cloud environment separately and on-premises separately, right? So that way, it is going to be different for each of those scenarios, right? To summarize all, Windows Hello for Business would be deployed and used for Windows users across the organizations, right? And passwordless as well as high security environments would be used passkeys or passkey FIDO2 security keys, where it is going to prevent all of that and everything is going to happen behind the scene, right? And for enterprise organizations or for organizations who have their own PK infrastructure, right? So they would be here leveraging either be certificates based authentications, right? Or even it could be used with Windows Help for Business basis on the environment and needs. And the last is mobile friendly authentication method, which is Microsoft Authenticator with number of or number matching, right? So these are the four different phishing resistant MFA methods. Hope you will understand it. Hope you will learn something new. And please do share this video with your friends and colleagues and let them know that they can learn something about this one. And yeah, that's all for this video. Hope you liked it. Please do like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.